Good evening once again, everybody. I am still the calm scribe, and now I'm being joined with my fabulous co-host, Billy, aka Sporkle McSpork, and we are here to break down episode 6 of The Wheel of Time, The Flame of Tar Valon. How are you tonight, Billy?
I'm doing well, Travis. Thanks again for having me on. This is so much fun. I love the Wheel of Time, and if I could name the top three things in my life, I think number two would be talking about the Wheel of Time. So
Nice.
here we are.
So, I've hit the nail on the head, as it were, for a co-host. This is fantastic. I really enjoy chatting with you. Like I said earlier, we have a nice connection. We click when we talk about this stuff, and we haven't really gone after each other's throats yet, which is pretty good. It's not like we disagree on, like, we kind of agree on most things.
Yeah, the biggest thing is just seeing things from different angles and being like, oh, I see how you got there. I didn't think of it that way. That's been the key, I think, is that passion loves passion. So
Yeah, and that's the big thing, is being able to have the different perspectives, and like we've said before on stream, from the perspective of a writer and the perspective of an actor, it's great to be able to take a look at this, and it's we both pick up on different things, and we like I think that's a really big success, that we pick up on a lot of the same stuff, but there's just so much stuff to be picked up on in this,
there is.
which is one of the reasons why chat we have a surprise guest coming next week, unless schedules change. We have a surprise guest coming next week who is a Wheel of Time fan, but I wouldn't really say it's super fan just yet, because they haven't read the books, and they're just being introduced to Wheel of Time for the first time through watching the show, which is very exciting to have that perspective come on. You might recognize who the special guest is when the time comes. But this episode was a very emotional episode. It really was.
It was.
We should actually say, before we start, we forgot something last episode, which was to toast our fallen brother that passed with the Stepan killing himself because of the broken bond. So here's to Stepan. And yeah, so last week's episode was emotional. There was a lot that happened, but this one actually brought me to the point of tears. There was just so much. They hit like I said, they hit the emotional point on so many different angles.
Yeah, it was one of those episodes where they didn't hit the emotion just in one storyline. They hit a lot of varied emotions that were all very, very powerful, and all coming from different angles and different people in different places, which was really cool and really masterful by the showrunners in this episode.
Yeah, it was. And there was, again, it doesn't happen often, but it seems every episode of The Wheel of Time, there's at least a couple of times where I verbally exclaim. It's like I'm watching a football game or a basketball game or something, where I start like cheering, or I start being like, oh no! And it's like, you can't help it. Like, it just kind of like comes forth. It's really amazing.
I think it's exciting for me to have those moments, but for me, so I watched my first viewing with my wife, and I get the most excited when she has those moments where I'm just like, yeah, that is powerful. She doesn't even know what's going on, and she's excited.
That's the thing. Baby sleep schedule is not working well. My wife is 10 minutes into episode 3. So we're getting there. That just means I have to watch all the episodes a third time. So, that's...
Oh, no.
It's a brutal life. But it's very... it's great to be able to finally be watching this and to see it play out. And I have to say, I'm approaching it now more and more of the angle of just not a non-viewer, but like someone who's not really familiar with it, because they have changed it. And I found being a writer, I think, makes it easier for me. Having brain damage and memory loss definitely makes it easier to step back from the story and say, you know what, I'm not going to think about what happened in the past too much. I'm just going to focus on the story they're telling now. Because you can drive yourself nuts going, but they, in the book. And I find just we're not going to be, as we knew when we started this, we're not going to be able to give the show its true depth and what its honor and what is deserved if we're constantly comparing it back to something else. And so just looking at it as its own thing and its own standing is beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's true of everyone, even people who haven't read the books or even know even know about the books. One of the things that's been the most frustrating for me personally is reading the critiques and critical arguments about how these episodes and their characters are just ripoffs of other fantasy tropes and fantasy franchises, many of which don't predate the story. So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
it's really frustrating to read it and be like, "Yep, you're completely right. Wheel of Time did rip off The Witcher."
That's it. That's the thing that we're going to come across. The other thing that I'm finding, and where if we're talking about vitriol in the review boards and stuff like that, and kind of surprising, but maybe not so much, is how much toxic masculinity is focusing on this. Where there's a lot of people that I've seen that are calling this a female power trip, that are saying that they're deriding masculinity and they're trying to create this imbalance of female versus male. And you know what? Just watch the show.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm not in tune with the entire story, but
Yeah, and that's the
um,
thing. I mean, I think it could just be because there's actually a story that has extremely powerful females. Hello,
yeah,
Laz, 420. Welcome. How are you? I think that's the thing, is that it's just people that are not, the fact that there's strong female protagonists that aren't cowering in a corner and trying to be saved by someone and I think that's fantastic. That's something I always liked about the story from the very beginning. But
agreed. I've always been a big fan of the strong women in this story, in this plot, and seeing them, especially characters like Nynaeve, come to life is just, it's really fun. She's a very strong, very stubborn character,
yeah,
and they portray that on screen very well.
exactly. And the fact too that, I mean, they actually address it in the story, which if you're
Hmm.
watching the series, Leandrin's talking, and she said, yes, women are the most powerful, basically, beings in the planet or on the world, but men still run the world.
Yeah, that was straight out of episode 5.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening with this. But talking about powerful female leads, we finally get to meet the Emerald Seat and Sanche, and it is quite the cold opening of when we meet her and get introduced to her life and a new location in the story. So, what were your thoughts on the cold opening?
Indeed. So I said it last week. I think that the showrunners are doing a masterful job with these cold opens. This was something that was prevalent in the books. They had little prologues before chapters. And going into this, I was curious if they were going to keep that, because it is a source of a lot of information that's going on in different parts, or backgrounds of characters that you might not get with just the character in whatever short amount of time they have in the spotlight. And this one is a huge example. Getting to see Suwan as a child, her relationship with her father, seeing her relationship with the river, and uh, it gives you a lot of respect for the character before she gets to the obviously extremely powerful seat that she's on. And you also get a little bit of political information about the location that she's from, where they do mention the town, right?
Yeah, they do
I
say
don't want
that
to say anything. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
they're in Tyr, on the banks of Tyr.
So you basically see that in Tier, people that can touch the one source are just straight up considered dark friends, and that's why their home was burnt down, and that symbol was written on the door, and why she ultimately got sent away. And that's really important to understand when you see how she carries herself when she's sitting on the seat.
Yep. And I think that she maintains a bit of that humble beginning with that scene where we'll get into it, but when is talking to Moraine, and Moraine refuses to say what she's been doing, and she's like,
Yep.
well, maybe it's the fact, your heritage, the fact that you're a lady and you look down upon people you see beneath you. So she kind of puts this, like, she still kind of sees herself as this fisherman's daughter in this seat of power, and still sees ladies kind of looking down on her, even though she's in this position of power. But I found the strength that they showed when her father wakes her up and she says, are the fish biting? Yes, well, let's go get them before some other bastards do. And I thought that was just that one scene like that, from such a sweet little girl, having that dialogue come from her is like, yeah, that's the, like, I wouldn't say like a street fighter, but she's tough as nails.
She's fierce.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's all about her business, and she's gonna accomplish what she sets out to do, and obviously that is true later in her life too.
Yeah, and the fact that her father actually says to her, like, don't use the one power for everything. Like, practice your knots, keep making nets, keep doing the stuff that you're supposed to be doing, stay true to yourself. I just found a beautiful way of handling that, and that whole scene I thought was just absolutely gorgeous.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing I find with this too, is the cinematography is just beautiful in the angles, the shots, the scenes they take. It's and the settings they chose. Like, that's something I think don't often get enough credit. And when, as you know, being an actor, when you're running a show, when you're doing a show, there are people that will go out and scout scenes and locations and find these places, and they did a damn good job. There's stuff I'm looking at, I'm like, is that actually a real location? Is that CGI, or is that made with styrofoam and painted really well?
It's crazy too, because if you think about how they do it, it's not like this place exists. It's not like the world of the Wheel of Time is a place that's on Earth. So they found some place in the middle of Estonia or Norway or wherever that this scene was filmed, and I, of course, named like Scandinavian countries for like a tropical river, but that's beside the point.
I wasn't going to mention that.
But and they take this location and make it Tyr. They make it Tar-Valon, and it's just like it's very fascinating how good the cinematography is, especially in this show.
Yeah, it is. And they also, with this, so sticking with the Emerald Seat and Moraine, we finally see the three sisters get brought to task for, well, I guess mainly Leandrin being brought to task because she was the one in charge for what happened with Logain. And we see Loghain's interaction, which really was so well done and so well acted. His vitriolic spewing of hatred at the Emerald Seat really made me want to reach through the screen and grab him by the throat. And again, it was very good at showing how the sisters maintain their composure, even in such a thing like that, like saying, I still nailed the green to the wall.
Ooh.
Yeah. At one point I was like, I kind of expected Moraine to backhand him when he said that, like she kind of betrayed a little bit of emotion on her face.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think Loghain's character has been really, really well done. And this was one of the instances where I kind of expected them to go a little bit more pathetic with the character. And instead, they still showed a little bit of fight in Loghain. And I appreciated that. Even though what he said was trash and I wanted a sister to slap a false dragon, I was into it. It really gave, like, he wanted to die, and he figured insulting a bunch of Aes Sedai was the way to get it done.
To the Maryland's face. And that was the thing.
Yeah.
I sat there watching that scene, and I thought, how long has he been thinking of that tirade that he was going to go on?
Yeah, exactly.
That was so well thought out and well planned. And I think the other thing, too, is that really showed the strength of the Emerald Seat. Showed her intelligence, showed her fierceness, showed her strength, and her cruelty. Like, she's not just going to say, this is what you did, you get banned, you get killed. It's, no, you are going to suffer, and we are going to have eyes on you 24/7 to make sure that you're suffering. And if you're not suffering, we will work harder to make sure that you're suffering.
And on top, and just to add insult to injury, we are going to study you while you're suffering.
Yeah.
We are going to document your suffering and how that affects others down the line. I it was cold, it was calculating, and I loved it.
Yeah, it was just absolutely gorgeous, and that's what I found was, because we really got a good taste of the tower politics that were happening in, and
Yep.
I mean, we all knew Leandrin was a snake in the grass, and it's just she happened to really show it. If she finally came forward, and we got to see some of her machinations and her trying to pull the strings of power to set things up against Moraine. That's one thing I do miss is knowing how vicious the Amerlin seat could be. I'm very curious to see what Leandrin's punishment is going to be.
Yeah, Leandrin straight up showed her fangs in this episode a couple of times, both straight up when she was speaking to Amerlin's seat, but also when she spoke to Moraine in the halls later on in the episode. And not only do I wonder how this very cool, calculating Suan is going to deal with this, but I also just I'm intrigued to see how the politics continues to play out in the tower. There's obviously, and they even mentioned it a couple times, there's a certain etiquette when it comes to speaking and who you defend, and greens and blues defending a red is unheard of.
Yeah.
So, what kind of rift does this cause or create? Like, what is going to happen based on just how out of bounds they have gone with this whole thing?
They have, and there was a couple of surprises in this episode, and one of the ones that struck me was that, for all intents and purposes, it seems like Leandrin has a boy toy that can channel, hidden away somewhere, and that's that Moraine knows about. So she's got that ace up her sleeve to protect the tavern that she's traveling with. I'm assuming that he can channel because Maureen said that I will tell your red sisters about it, and you know what they will do to him. Which to me meant that they will hunt him down and still him or gentle him.
Right. Yeah. I was hoping that it wasn't just some man and they would just go murder him because Leandrin had a relationship with him, so I assumed there was something there.
Yeah.
But maybe.
Yeah, that remains to be seen. Like they really set up the tower politics well with that, and I think too that with Moraine not telling the Emerald Seat what she's doing, what she's working on out there, and then we find out in the bathhouse scene, which again had our first real taste of nudity in the series, and it was beautifully done, beautifully executed with shadows and shades. You don't really see much of anything; you just get the illusion of things. Kind of have to read between the lines there to see anything as well. And in that conversation, there with Moraine and the leader of the Blues, that the leader doesn't know what Moraine is doing.
Right.
She's out. Is it Morgaine? Megan. So Megan doesn't know what Moraine is up to when she's out there. So there's not only power politics with the Ajas against the Ajas and leaders against the Amerlin seat. There's also politicking happening within the Ajas themselves, which is quite obvious.
It's very intriguing to hear the conversation between Moraine and Megan, and just the fact that the leader of the House of Spies, the house that knows everything, is going, what exactly have you been doing for the past few years? Like we don't know.
Sinking the Terran ferry.
right.
I love that they circled back to that, so that they sent a package as like a penance or whatever for her.
Yeah, and in which case she replies, "Oh, you're getting better at your having spies," which coming from the head of a house of spies, I found to be very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, and I love the message from the yellow, but that little yellow flower was...
Oh, was it a flower? I thought it was a feather.
I thought it was like a branch with like little yellow knobs sticking on it. I forgot. I actually have persimmon in the kitchen. I bought persimmon, but I don't have it with me. So, anyways, yeah. So, and that's the other thing too. Is like Alana's always eating.
Yep, I
Alana's
noticed that
always
too.
got food in her hand. I love
She
that
loves
about her.
men. She loves men, and she loves eating.
Yeah, that's Alana is really quickly becoming one of my favorite characters. Like she is coming
Same.
up there. It's,
Same.
and she does well. So we know with emotion as well because we see that Moraine refuses the Emerald seat to express what she's doing, and that whole scene was just so tense and so masterfully done. Like the way Moraine put forehead to floor to marble almost looked like she was being compelled with the one power, but it wasn't. It was just like such a she was doing it herself, and it was
Yep.
just so well. Like it almost looked like there was a compulsion happening there, and it was beautiful.
Yeah,
But that scene
exactly.
was very tense.
And I think it helps with the tenseness of that scene because in at least 2 episodes prior to that, there's conversations where people talk about how bad Moraine's relationship with the Emerald Seat is and how much the seat hates her,
Yeah.
which makes the next part a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah, shocking. Let's just say they've nailed down exactly what the relationship is between Moraine and Lan. They've organized that, but I also like the fact that they do show that the sisters can blank the bond. They can mask the bond so that the warders
Yep.
can't feel what they feel, and which does bring up some very interesting questions to me.
Mhm.
Because she was going off to do what she was doing, which is one of the reasons why obviously she didn't want Lan to feel everything. So the question that came to me as a bit of a side note is, how much do the Greens feel when they're connected to their warders and there's multiples of them? That's got to be an intense, sensational whirlpool to be involved, let's say, with Alana and her several warders.
Yeah, which I don't know if you noticed, but I think she picked up another one.
Yeah,
She had 3 while she was walking through the hall. Anyway,
the collector.
um, yeah. No, I agree, and I kind of in the back of my mind figured, oh, maybe that's one of the compulsions that brings a green to become a green. It draws you to the battle, Aja.
Yeah.
Not only do you become powerful, but you get to experience things that no one else gets to experience.
Exactly, it's a pretty big thing, but I have to say I thought that this was like I love the fact that Moraine was kind of like, no, you need to focus on protecting the five, our friends from Two Rivers. I keep wanting to say Edmonds Field, but from the Two Rivers.
Close.
Yeah, and the fact that to me this episode was almost could have been called Portals and Gateways because she opens this beautiful portal or gateway in her room and she steps through into something where there's like the shock of the century where Sirwan is sitting there in like on this bed and they walk through and there's this wonderful, like that whole scene was beautiful. Before we get into that scene, the one thing I did want to mention that I really liked was that it did tie back because I found it strange that they introduced Swan with the cold open the way they did as her as a child, showing her background. And I mean, at first, as I was watching the episode, I kind of thought, showing someone go from, for lack of a better term, from rags to riches, to go from being a fisherman's daughter to the seat of power, kind of builds credence to who she is, and that conversation in the throne room made sense. However, the thing that I really loved is that wherever Moraine met her was a fisherman's hut. And if you looked closely, while she was waiting for Moraine, she was making a net and she was practicing her knots, just like her father told her to when she was a child. And she's much older than she is now. So she's been maintaining that practice and that diligence supposedly through her entire life. That seems to be her happy place, her go-to place, that no matter how powerful she's become, and I think that's why she has that root of the ladies looking down on her, is because she still sees herself and is most content as a simple fisherman's daughter.
Yeah, and I imagine that her rise to the Amerlin seat wasn't easy or peaceful, and I'm sure that was a point of contention in the politics of the tower while she was moving up was she was just a girl from a river town, and we have all these, high important nobles, and why aren't they going to be on the seat of power? But I digress. Yeah, the scene as it opens up was absolutely stunning and really tied the cold open back around to the character in such a way that it was powerful. It really just sets up the emotional like juggernaut that's going to be this scene.
Yeah, it was a character arc and a snap.
Yep.
They gave so much character arc in that to bring her that. I mean, she obviously still has much larger character arc to go through, but they brought her from boom to boom really quickly, and it was beautiful. And then that scene of tenderness, and that's one thing I like about this show, is that any sexuality they do show, any kind of physical interactions that the characters have, is all consensual. It's all loving. It's all supporting. They want the best for each other. They want to support each other. There's nothing like there's no sexual assault. There's no sexual violence. There's no like romantic violence or anything like that. It's all like the amount of love and tenderness and support in the show is absolutely beautiful to me. And that scene between the two of them was just, I mean, if we take it down to absolute politics, it was a lesbian kiss between an interracial couple in a fantasy show, and it was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. It was not only emotionally pleasing and beautiful to witness, but it touches something even on a geopolitical spectrum. It was just phenomenal. It was phenomenal, and I think both actresses did a great job, really showing that kind of affection, that kind of desire, and that bond of two people that are in love that haven't had a chance to be together in apparently years.
Yeah. And at least 2 years. And that's the thing I
Yeah.
find with the show is that something I advocate as a writer all the time is if you have a character that's transgender, that's bisexual, that is on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, that doesn't have to be that character's mark, their thing, that's their main character trait. And I think they handle that beautifully. We've already been introduced to characters that are bisexual. We've introduced characters that are LGBTQ. And so like there is this spectrum of, and they don't come out right and say that, but you just see that sexuality is kind of accepted as a spectrum on this show or in this world. And there's no qualms about it. There's no issues with it. And I think that's a fantastic thing because to me, that's proper representation. Having a character
Absolutely.
that is, bisexual on a show and keep waving the flag of, oh, look, he's bisexual, doesn't create proper presentation. I think just having a character, and that happens to be what they are, but straight characters, they don't wave flags saying, oh, by the way, he's straight. Look at this guy, he's straight. It's just that's a part of what they are in their background, and it sometimes factors into how they interact. So I think they handle that really well with this. And you're right, that was an absolutely beautiful scene.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that as well, not only do they not wave that flag and make it the centerpiece of the scene or anything to do with the world, but they didn't fall onto the trope of the fact that this is a lesbian relationship is the cause for the strife. That wasn't the issue. The issue was with the power dynamic of the couple, not the sexuality of the characters. And that you don't need to discuss anything further. It's two people in love. The problem is the power struggle.
The power struggle. And they do have that too with this last scene with Lan and Stepan, when Stepan has drugged Lan's tea and they're talking. And he's talking about joining Alana's orders. And he's like, I've never been with a man before. And he's like, let alone two. And he's like, this is going to be interesting. And then Lan's comment up is like, well, that's if they're attracted to you. If they're interested in you. So it's like, they don't shy away from it either. I think they found just a nice balance. Like, this is what life is, and they're showing life. And it is the power struggle with the Emerald Seat and Moraine. And that I absolutely loved. The juxtaposition of that beautiful connection, and like her when Moraine comes through and she's got that smirk on her face, and she's like, have I pleased you, mother? Is this okay, mother? And then she's like, I hate it when you call me that. And then you see this intimacy, and then that moment where Moraine's like on your knees. And to me, that was just like, that was one of the times that I cheered, that I shouted, I'm like, this is perfect. Because it showed that, yeah, there's this massive power dynamic in the normal world where they're in the tower, but when they're alone, it's a lot more playful, and there isn't Suan holding that dynamic of, I'm your leader, you will obey me, and this thing of like, is Moraine in this just because it's a power struggle thing? I think they handled that masterfully.
And just to throw this out there, it's a little bit behind the curtain, but the actress that plays Moraine, I can't remember, Rosamund.
Yeah, Rosamund Pike.
Pike, yeah, thank you. Actually, came out and said that was an ad-libbed line. That was not a scripted line. That was something that came out in the heat of the scene. And I'm so glad that they went with it, because it just adds that little bit of playful spice to that relationship, which makes it great.
Yeah, it did. And that also, like, that took the heat of the moment from here to here.
Yeah.
Like that, like there was no doubting what was happening after that. It was like, plus, I mean, the fact that they're in different clothes afterwards. But yeah, I just found like that really brought up the heat, and it was just, that's something I love. I find oftentimes when you listen to these behind the scenes things, or you're looking at the director's cuts or something like that, some of the most iconic lines that we get from movies and television shows and stuff like that are things that are just ad-libbed, that are just thrown in there. And I think that's, again, this is evidence of that, and it's beautiful the way they did it. But it also shows the tie back. Well, one thing too, when Leandrin and Moraine are talking in the hallway, Leandrin actually does say to her, my old friend, like, count your days, whatever you're doing, get it done, because your days are numbered tomorrow. Here comes your calling. And she calls her old friend. So that does show that they do have, as is kind of hinted, they've got a history together. And it almost appears as though that history goes from beyond the tower to before the tower with that. So that's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out, because normally you would have, if someone challenges you and you challenge back, there's a bit of a power struggle. But that was, Leandrin challenges Moraine, and she's like, I'm going to tell your secret. If you say another word, walk away. And then Leandrin actually, for now, walked away, which was kind of interesting. But
she got a little bit pensive and went, well, that was unexpected.
Yeah, that's not how I saw this conversation going. But yeah, and then the whole thing of so from being in the tower or in front of the Amerlin seat and saying, I can't tell you what I'm working on, and the leader of the Blue Aja not knowing what Moraine's working on, turns out the only person who knows what Moraine's working on is the Amerlin seat.
What's that about?
And again, like, this shows how beautiful the politicking is, and how they hold things. Like, I challenge anyone to tell me that's not familiar with having seen the show before, that they watched that dressing down of Moraine by the Amerlin seat and anticipated them being in a relationship together.
Yeah, like, especially with all the foreshadowing of them having a bad relationship, which means that their outward appearance and the way that they treat each other in public really shows a disconnect when, in fact, they're lovers.
Yeah, and they've got this thing. I'm curious to find out more about where they met, how that worked, going through that portal, because I knew there had to be something, because Moraine kept going to that picture on her wall, which was very nice.
Right, exactly.
So there was something.
You knew it had to, like, something had to be up with it, because twice she went to that picture and, like, looked at it longingly, and nothing came out of it. Yeah. So, and then the rendezvous happened, and I'm very curious. There's no way that they can have something so center and then intrusive be just forgotten. So it's got to come back, I assume, at some point.
Yeah, I think so.
It has to.
Yeah, because, I mean, obviously, and the power was involved in somehow to activate this. But we do learn that when they're talking about when when they're talking about the prophecy that came through, because Moiraine's now having some doubts from all what she hears of the Gleeman talking about a multi-headed dragon and all this other stuff. That, which I didn't realize, that Siuan and Moiraine were the only two people that witnessed that prophecy of the child being born. So to me, it seems like they've been working together on this secret mission from that day. Like, I kind of, in my head, pictured them looking at each other and Siuan basically saying, find him. Don't tell anyone what you're doing. Find him.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it seems to play out. The question is kind of related to this, is about the third sister, the one that actually spoke the prophecy. They don't really get into it in the conversation, but in the notes of the episode on the Amazon Prime notes, it says that this sister, the prophecy was so powerful that this sister died.
Wow.
And that's why they're the only two that are now around to see it fulfilled
and to know what's happening.
Yeah.
That's definitely setting up a nice and powerful thing. And then, of course, we have that really heartbreaking scene the next day of Moiraine being exiled, and that scene where Moiraine tells her that, like when they're in that cabin or in the fishing hut, where she's like, when you punish me, it has to be this. And part of me is kind of curious as to what the punishment would have been. Obviously, I think it would have been severe. If they had such a vitriolic relationship in public, I think it would have been a severe punishment. But I love that they introduced the oath rod. And if you watch closely, I mean, when Moiraine grabbed the oath rod, she gently brushes Siuan's finger. When a little bit later, Siuan brushes her finger. And then that whole scene just had so much emotion packed into it and was absolutely beautiful. Then everyone turning their backs on Moiraine was, again, finishing that off was, just the power that was packed into that whole storyline between those two was, and like they always do, there's so much crammed into that.
Yeah. So this is one of the scenes where, as an actor, I was taught at a very young age that as much as a scene wants you to pay attention to the main characters in the scene, the best way to get information is to look at the characters in the back. And in this scene, there was no way to just clip it so you're only seeing Moiraine and Siuan as they're doing this oath. And if you watch the characters in the other Aja, you can see how tense the whole thing is. They will give very fleeting glances to each other. They'll kind of stare down some of the other colors, especially the reds, and it really just added to the atmosphere in the room, I felt, and just it gives you kind of a choking feeling in your throat where you're just like, oh, this is a bad thing that's happening.
Yeah, a very bad thing. And it also kind of sets the tone for the other sisters of, because we know behind the scenes that they know each other and that this is all machinations to make sure that Moiraine can stay out of the tower, because Megain wants her to stay in the tower, and that obviously screws up their plans. And the Emerlin can't without reason be like, no, you need to go off on this mission for me, because that brings up so many questions. So they had to do this. But from the other sister's perspective, it's, if you've got a tense relationship with the seat and you refuse to obey her commands, you're exiled.
Yeah, she's gonna banish you.
Yeah, and that sets really, in one sense, strengthens her position, because she becomes even more someone to reckon with. But in another sense, kind of weakens her position, because it's like, is she becoming mad with power? Does she need to be unseated? Because that's, someone said, no, I'm not telling you what I've been doing, and then they've been banished, not forever, until they're called back. Right? And that was the big thing, was that when they swore the oath was that you're exiled until you're called back. So there is an opportunity for Moiraine to be called back. But what happens if the Maryland seat is unseated? Can Moiraine still be called back is the big question, right?
That's interesting. And one of the things that specifically I noticed in this scene was that she doesn't swear to the oath to the seat. She swears the oath specifically to Swan. So that leads me to believe that she'll be able to come back if Swan calls her back, whether or not she still has the power or not. I could be, taking a shot in the dark with this one,
That makes
but
sense, though. Especially they've got those machinations with each other. That seems, yeah.
right. It just felt like it was a very powerful and specific way that she made her oath, and knowing how Aes Sedai's oaths and promises and everything work, the fact that she said her name rather than Armelin Seat or Tarvalon or Aes Sedai,
Or the Hall of
she
Power.
said specifically Hall of Power. Yeah, like she was very specific on who it was that could call her back. Maybe that's a lover's thing. I don't know, but one of I had a train of thought and it just like poofed out of my mind. I bet it was so cool too.
It'll come back. Just wait for the next stop.
That's right.
But yeah, so that's you're right. Actually, that is they did very specifically. And speaking of that too, that was one part that kind of made me question a little bit. Was
That's what it is.
the saying the full name?
Yep.
Yeah, the fact that Moraine actually said called her Swan Sanche, daughter of the river, and it goes on with the full thing. So I don't know if that's become an honorific title for her that everybody knows, or if that was a little bit of an insight of their intimacy, which would shock me that they would do that. And I did the same thing. I watched The Room, and nobody in the room flinched.
Yeah, which makes you assume that it must be an honorific, or maybe it was just supposed to cement the fact that they're so close that she knows like the exact things that her father called her. We don't know, but as far as The Room was concerned, it was A-okay in their book.
Yeah, because I think Maureen's smarter than to do something where she's going to be exiled from the tower and then leave Swan in a situation where questions are going to be raised about what happened.
Yeah, especially.
That seems silly to torpedo everything they've been working on with a silly romantic interlude at that moment.
Especially Moraine, a very qualified blue who is all about keeping secrets and spying. Like, letting loose with something silly like that just to spark controversy just doesn't seem realistic. But
Exactly.
as you said, The Room didn't blink an eye, so...
Yeah. But, I mean, we've jumped over a lot of stuff. And
Yeah.
speaking of, kind of staying true to the Emerald Seat for a moment, we have the scene where Moraine goes and talks to Loyal. And so we see Moraine after she gets the dressing down by the Emerald Seat. She's having tea, sitting on the porch. And you see Nynaeve and Loyal walk behind. They kind of make a cameo through that scene, which is kind of cool. And then you see Moraine having this conversation with Loyal, asking him to do something for her, where you see that she calls him the Builder for some reason, and she's very, she bows to it. Well, she doesn't bow to him in that scene, but she's very respectful to him. And so when we see the next scene with Moraine, and she's in the Hall of Power, and she is saying, that was the first look I had on my face when I first came here as well. I thought she was talking to Loyal. I thought this was like, oh yeah, come chat with me. By the way, I'll show you around. You do this for me, I'll show you around into the seat of power. And then you turn and it's Egwene that's sitting there. And then enter emotional scene part 2, which was just, I don't know, if whatever it is, reunions get me. Reunions really get me on an emotional level. And that one was getting.
I think it's especially powerful in a show like this where you honestly don't know whether people are going to get reunited. It's one of those questions of will they, won't they, or will they be on the lam for a year, or will they be lost or killed by Trollocs? When Nynaeve goes missing after the Trolloc attack on the two rivers, there's a serious longing for that character to come back. You're just like, oh, that character's gone. This is the way it is now. That character's gone. And then when she comes back, there's so many emotions that come, especially with the way that she came back. And I think that's going to be the same with all of their reunions, because there's a good chance that they don't reunite, regardless of what any text says. This is a different ball game,
Yeah.
and connections might not happen.
And they separate. It's not generally a, oh hey, here's a pat on the back, nice to see you, we'll see you again sometime. It's usually something chaotic or violent or aggressive that they get pulled apart from. And I love that scene where Green's like, Nynaeve, I thought you were dead. And she's like, so did the Trolloc that had me.
Yeah, that was great.
That was a beautiful line.
Classic Nynaeve.
Yeah, that was a beautiful line. But yeah, so they reunite and they don't get much of a chance to talk. And then we have the thing where they actually meet the Emerald Seat.
Mhm.
And again, in a very humble manner. And I think that was, to me, that was obviously angled. I used to work in finance, and one of the things that I was taught is if you're going to talk investments or securities or something like that with a farmer, you don't show up wearing a three-piece suit. You show
Sure.
up wearing jeans, boots, and a t-shirt or a nice like plaid shirt or something like that. You dress to fit the meeting. And I think that's what that was. I think the Emerald knew that if she had have been in her stole of power and sitting there when they were brought before her and stuff, that conversation would have gone entirely differently. Not that it was a smooth conversation to begin with, but I think she brought herself down to her roots for a reason in that scene.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of that conversation not going very well, we get to see a little bit more of the two rivers in Nynaeve in that scene. I do think that she was even a little bit more rude than I would have expected.
Yeah, she kind of went a little bit over the edge on that one. I thought she went from being stubborn and defending my people to just blatantly disrespectful and kind of ignorant.
Yeah, which definitely caught me off guard. But hey, still love my girl, so we'll see past that. But I think one of the things that this episode especially focused on very subtly is the maturity of all the quote unquote kids in this one. People took some real big steps, especially Egwene and Rand,
Yeah.
who both had major traumas and really are looking like they came out on the other side much better people.
Yeah, definitely. And I have to say, I do love the, what I refer to in my mind as the pinprick moment with Egwene. When the Emerald Seat is saying, we found this channeler, the most powerful channeler in 1,000 years, and you see Egwene kind of puff up and be like, yeah, and there's a little Nynaeve. And she's like, what? That was just this like beautiful little pinprick of like, what the hell? But again, that was the shock of, but it can't have been that shocking if Egwene has learned that if you're a wisdom, you can channel. So there had to have been some knowledge that Nynaeve could channel somewhere, but the fact that she's even more powerful than Egwene is pretty impressive.
Exactly. And I think it just comes from the conversation that she had with Moraine about how powerful she could be. When the Emerald Seat started talking about this, she was like, "Oh wow, I'm super cool." And then to find out that Nynaeve is actually quite the talented channeler herself,
Yeah,
was that pinprick of surprise.
exactly. And I think that's the thing. Like, yes, Nynaeve did go a little bit more aggressive, but I think that also kind of offsets the fact that Egwene now has, like you said, she went through a massive part of growth, and she went from being this unsure, I don't know, what do I do, kind of, but ready for adventure kind of character, to, and not really looking at, like, would never really challenge Nynaeve before. So seeing the way Nynaeve was reacting, she bowed, Nynaeve didn't. And you can see her kind of look at her like, what's wrong with you? And then this whole thing happens, and then her response is, what do we have to do? So as Egwene, that was like, no, I'm taking charge in this, you're coming in. And that was, to me, a kind of a, okay, I know what's happening, kind of. I don't, but I'm up to speed enough. I trust you. How are we going to do this? Right? Like, you just told me the fate of the world rests on my shoulders. What's going to happen with that?
Yeah, I thought that I feel like the growth that she especially is showing is it's really good. I was very afraid that we were gonna have timid Egwene for 2 seasons. but I'm
Yeah.
glad.
Speaking of
Yeah.
timid Egwene, she brought the rings back.
She did, and I like the way that she delivered the message. It wasn't just, "Oh yeah, here's some rings." It was, "I heard that you were captured by White Cloaks. White Cloaks won't be bothering you anymore. Here's a bunch of rings." I was like, "Wow, damn, sister, you just stamped an exclamation point right there."
Yeah, and that's the thing. But that now brings the question: is Valda dead? She stabbed him in the shoulder. I mean, there's a lot of wolves. I think if you got a pretty bad shoulder injury and you're bleeding pretty heavily, that's probably going to attract a bit of attention.
Yeah, it's just seems like one of those shows where if you don't see a death, you can't be sure that it happened. So
Yeah,
I definitely don't rule him out in any regard, but I definitely feel like he's at least put to bed for a while. Especially, I mean, we've seen people get worse shoulder wounds than this guy did and
but to be fair,
survive.
it's the left shoulder though. He got stabbed in the right shoulder. We don't know how
Maybe
severe a right
that's
shoulder wound is.
Yeah, maybe that's going to be the difference. I don't know, but I think the wild card really is the wolves.
Yeah.
Is it something? Did we don't know when they stopped? Did they like eat their fiddle before they left, or what? So
Yeah, and then we have confirmation on that. We have confirmation that Perrin has golden eyes like a wolf. And you and I were right. Even Agrina agrees with us that it seems like the wolves were listening to him or he was listening to them. There was some kind of affinity, some kind of communication between Perrin and the wolves.
yes, and although I agree, one of the things that came out to me as a viewer was sure the wolves seem to be either communicating or talking or understand Perrin, but are his eyes wolves' eyes or are they dragon's eyes?
Yeah, that's the thing. Because it was. And oftentimes they tend to be very blatant. When they're blatant with something, there it means that there's a twist to it. So the fact that Agrina actually says he had golden eyes like a wolf,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know. And like Maureen said, we don't know what the powers of the dragon are going to be.
Right.
And we also learned in that scene that the yellow Aja are the strongest healers in the world, and that
Yeah,
they will.
which we heard kind of about a couple episodes ago when they were searching for an Aes Sedai to help them.
Yeah,
But we actually got to see them in their natural habitat, I guess.
yeah. And for people saying that there wasn't enough Aes Sedai in the tower, well, now we definitely saw some Aes Sedai for that. And we also saw Moraine playing with the truth a little bit more when Irene first says, Caesar says, are Rand and Matt, are they here? And she says, I'll let you know when I see them. And I think that, because I mean, that can be an easy play on words of, I haven't seen them today, so I don't know if they're here. Like that could really be playing dumb kind of thing. But I think to me, that kind of struck me at first. I was like, oh, what is she up to? What is she like? She's playing games with this. And then on retrospect, I was kind of thinking that I think that was more to focus the conversation instead of it being like, oh, are they here? Are they safe? What's going on with them? It's just like, I've got spies, eyes looking. I'll let you know when I know more. I'll let you know. But I know I've heard from on good authority, her own, that they're alive and they're okay. And let's focus on this. So I think that was to stop the conversation from being derailed. Was that little bit of trickery that she was doing?
Another piece of that conversation that I found very enlightening is when Maureen's telling Egwene, "Hey, the Yellow Sisters, the best healers around. Perrin's gonna be okay. Everything's great." And Egwene turns around and says, "Well, physically, he's gonna be okay."
Yeah, that hit me too. The fact that they're dealing with mental health is you don't see that in
There's
fantasy.
Yeah, there was a recognition that the wounds that Perrin has been inflicted with go beyond the physical realm, and I appreciated that, and also just felt terrible because it reminded me of what Perrin's going through currently.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing. Like I do like the fact that they're hitting tones that you normally don't see in this kind of story. And they're hitting them well, like involving the fact that you're going through traumas after trauma after that. And something that's always bothered me with movies, not just fantasy, but movies in general, that you see these people go through these massive traumas, and the next day they're out with their friends laughing and grabbing a drink. And it's like, well, it kind of like, you need to process, you need to go through some stuff. And I think that they're handling that pretty well with this so far, at least. They're factoring all those kind of things into it. They must definitely have had sensitivity readers on the team when they were going through writing with this.
Yeah, or something.
Yeah, so we see that Egwene and Perrin are back and doing well for themselves. We'll come back to them in a moment. But then we also see more of Mat and Rand.
Oh boy!
And we see Rand like step up and try to take down a warder and his Aes Sedai at once.
Yeah, I mean, I applaud him for trying, I guess, but I was very happy to see Lan take Rand out without too much trouble. I was a little bit concerned that Rand was gonna be like a superstar and to make the fight more trouble than it was, but Lan stepped in and did warder things, and we got to see what a trained warder versus a sheep herder from the Two Rivers.
Yeah, that's it. Just with a blade that he didn't even know his father had until 35 days ago, 40 days ago.
Right.
And so that was a big thing. And we also got to see that scene with Moiraine and the dagger was beautiful. So it turned out it was madness from... Well, I don't know if it's the madness is from the dagger, but him acting off and being sick and all this other stuff was being caused by this dagger that he had taken from Shadar Logoth.
Yeah, we're still out on whether or not Mat has madness, but we know that the darkness was the dagger from Shadow Logoth. And that the spectacle, which was the scene of Moiraine drawing that evil out and like letting it fester on her before she put it back in the dagger. That was a nauseatingly cool scene.
Yeah. The way it crawled on her face and like had tendrils, it was almost like it was feeling for an entry.
Yeah, it was trying to get into her mouth because
Yeah. That's
how she was pulling it out of Mat. I just thought visually that was really gross but stunning.
Yeah, it was. They did a great job on it, and how she pulled the evil and put it back into the dagger. And something tells me that's not going to be the last we see of that dagger. I don't know what it is. Like the fact that it wasn't, for me, the fact that it wasn't destroyed, it wasn't taken away. Like Lan just covered it with a blanket, and then Moiraine made that thing of like, if he touches it again. So I'm like,
we're in trouble. Yeah, the fact that they didn't give us anything about what happened to the dagger makes me think it in the very least it's still around, possibly still very close, and that concerns me.
Yeah, that's very concerning. And I don't know if Mat would have learned his lesson from it, if he would go back and touch it again or not. Like Mat's not a stupid guy, but he's impulsive,
right? And especially when it comes to things like providing for his sisters. And maybe we can get into that in a little bit when we kind of wrap it up. But I get a feeling that his compulsion towards his family is going to rear its ugly head again.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the... but I think to this point, like we've... when after Moiraine has seen Mat and Rand and saved Mat, and that... dressing down of Nynaeve was just like, there wasn't even any like punches held or anything like that. Just, you're stupid, you could have killed your friend, you let your pride get in the way, if you call yourself a wisdom, start acting like it. And then to walk off it was a cold splash of water in the face that Nynaeve needed.
Yeah, and it was brutal, and I agree that it was something that was needed, especially as we continue to see the stubbornness of her as a character. But man, that was a burn, as we say. But the thing that happened afterwards, which made me very excited, was again, Rand saw what Moiraine did. Moiraine like fought with this shadow liquid creature madness thing and saved his friend. And he was a mature man about it
Yep.
and went right up to her and said, "All right, I'm in your corner. You helped. I was wrong. Let's do this."
Yep.
That's huge coming from the kid that was like so standoffish for the first 3 episodes, 4 episodes.
Oh, exactly.
Like,
Even up to this episode, episode 6, where
yeah,
they first walk
yeah,
in, and instead of him being like, "Oh, hey, nice to see you," his first instinct is to grab a sword,
yeah,
right? Like to fight
that's true.
against
Yeah,
them. And I think that's the thing. Like, yeah, like Rand and Egwene both went through major character arcs in this one, and I think that it shows now at least that Nynaeve has been put back in her place a little bit, and kind of not put in her place, but at least rocked on her heels.
mm,
And Egwene and Rand seem to be like, okay, you know what? Yeah, you're cool. I'm on board. What do we need to do? Let's go do this.
yeah.
Let's
They're
save the
stepping in line.
world, kind of thing. It bothered me. I think the biggest thing for me in that scene with Moiraine and Nynaeve was the fact that it happened in front of Loial. Like, I hold Loial in such high regard and high respect. I was like, when I saw that, I was like, I would be so freaking humiliated if that happened to me in front of this guy.
Yeah, I mean, me and you, absolutely. I don't know that Nynaeve has that kind of care. I honestly don't think that Loyal's opinion of her is at the forefront of her being right now.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
so that didn't surprise me as much as just I still think her outburst in front of the Armelin seat was the most egregious act.
Yeah. That was something that I thought was just, again, she pushed. I don't think that they pushed her character too far. I think her character just went too far. I think
Yeah,
that's in her
agreed.
character. And I think that was her she doesn't like Aes Sedai, and we have to remember the story that she told when Moiraine first came to the Two Rivers, where she was talking about the previous wisdom, who trekked all the way there, was in rags as a child, and then was sent back because she didn't look good enough. And I don't know who the seat was at that time, but I think that's kind of where she's coming through with this, where it's like, you know what, I have no respect for you.
Yeah,
Like, that's I've got
yeah,
like
no.
I'm not going to come and kowtow and bow to you and whatever, because I really don't care who you are or what you think. And I think they showed that, but it was just, and again though, that showed the grace and dignity of the Emerald seat to be hit with this blast from this young girl and be like, you know what, I don't care, the wheel doesn't care, the world doesn't care, grow up, do your job.
Yeah, I agree. And just to add to that, um, Nynaeve might not even know if this is the same Armelin seat. Like, it could be a completely different person at this point, and their name doesn't really seem to go out into the general populace. They just know them as the Amulet seat.
Yeah.
So, for all we know, Nynaeve was standing there thinking she was talking to the person that like humiliated her uh,
Mentor.
mentor. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say boss, and then went.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing, is that that was exactly it, and it was kind of, and I think that also that scene kind of created a shift in the power dynamic between Egwene and Nynaeve, where
Yeah.
Egwene was kind of like, you know what, you're not always right,
Hmm.
and sometimes you need someone else to show you the way. But yeah, I found like the again, it was more of a building and setting stuff up for this, because Moraine does get exiled and banished from the tower, and Lan. My first thought was that Lan was going to be stuck behind, because when you see Moraine leave off on horseback and go tearing off on her own, I was like, okay, what's going to happen with Lan now? But then we see that Lan and Loial bring the others, and we see another reunion of the two. But at this point, you can tell that they knew that they were going to be meeting up again with each other.
Yep.
Because when they do meet up again with each other, Perrin actually looks at Matt, gives him a hug, looks at Matt, and says, "At least I wasn't stupid enough to steal a cursed dagger from Shadar Logoth." So
Yep.
he knew the story of what happened to Matt at that point.
Yeah, it was nice because you still got to have that reunion scene with everyone. but you didn't have to have individual reunion scenes. So
Yeah.
the way that they did it for time and for television was great. And then you also got like the funny little quippy things like parents little little jab at Matt, who in all intensive purposes the darkness is out of him, but still doesn't look too pleased to be where he is.
Yeah, Matt's not too happy about where he is. And there's that thing, the other thing that really struck me in that scene was Egwene jumping off the horse, running to Rand, Rand running to her. And there is that almost moment of intimacy.
Yep.
They hug each other, he's smiling, he leans in, she leans in a little bit, he leans in a little closer, she leans in a little closer, and they stop. And
Yeah,
there's
what's that
no,
about?
like, what was that?
Yeah, what's that about?
Yeah, but there was the thing, like there's like yeah, there's still this affection for each other, but there's a barrier. There wasn't this like I'm gonna run in, and again, that's the thing for me that breaks another trope, where it's like the
Yeah.
long lost lovers get brought back together and they run and they kiss and they fall madly in the grass and start rolling down the hill. And with this, it was just like the you're alive, that's great. What's going
We're
on?
still not there.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's I think it's nice to see carryover because the last time that these two were together, they were going through a rough spot. They were arguing over what Egwene's plans were. Was she was going to be an Aes Sedai now? Last time he knew she was going to be a Wisdom. Like he's being left out. I don't want anything to do with this, but I love you, but I don't. And instead of having a reunion and them automatically being goo goo gaga eyes in love teenagers, it was more realistic. They were happy to see each other, but they didn't
yeah.
go over the hill.
I think they're both kind of showing themselves that they're showing the growth that they've had with themselves. So we do know that everyone is still like Egwene and Rand are on board. Let's do this. Perrin just kind of
Yep.
Perrin just goes with where he's going. I do kind of I still have a bit of thing. I don't like the woman in the fridge that they did with Perrin.
Yep.
That's the whole thing. Still, I think they could have handled that differently, but I think they're handling the after effect of it. I just think we need to stop sacrificing women to put men on their path. There's other ways of doing it. There's other ways of writing. But
Yeah,
so
I
Perrin
agree.
kind of goes along to get along. Yeah.
Yeah, and he doesn't seem to really care either way, at least as far as we can tell at this point.
Well, I mean,
And
they did do a good sense in the sense that he's got nothing to go back to. He's got no draw to go back.
right. But whether he goes on this path or another path doesn't really matter to him. For all we know, he could be ready to go back with the Tinkers at this point. Like
Yeah.
he hasn't come out and really given a what he wants to do himself.
And the other question that I kind of have with Perrin is, what does he know? He knows obviously that he's not afraid of the wolves and there's some kind of affinity. Could he feel his eyes change? Did he know that his eyes changed? Was Egwene like, oh, by the way, when you were being tortured, you kind of turned into a half wolf there? Like, what's
Yeah.
going on? Or is he just tucking along thinking that everything is normal?
I assume that he knows that at least something's going on, just based on when you're in the healing with the yellow Aja sisters, and he's lying there. I didn't feel like he was lying there like someone who was asleep. To me, he wasn't breathing like someone who was asleep. He was breathing like someone who was deep in thought, like struggling with his own existence. So I think the past few days of him recovering and being alive has been him struggling with what am I, what's going on.
Yeah, that
And
very
he's
well
not
could be.
Yeah, he's not quite out of it yet.
And because I mean, he knows obviously there's something happening with the wolves that's going on there. So, but Perrin's
Yeah.
doing his thing, and then Nynaeve again pushes back, and and Rand I think push back a little bit when they're standing outside the gate in the field, and Nynaeve's like, we're not just going to come along with you. Like she still has that bit of like, she's rocked on her heels, she's there, so obviously she's game, but she's got this bit of defense, and then that's where Moraine and Loyal start explaining. Yeah, because Rand comes in and says, we've heard of these the ways. What is it? And they start explaining, and that was the thing that kind of shocked me was that you saw Moraine give such deference to Loyal through all this time, bowing and calling him Master Builder and being so respectful to him. And then
Yep.
as he is trailing on, like the Ogier are known to do, to just keep talking, she just cuts him off. Like, doesn't even like put up a hand. She cuts him off. Now, as I'm saying this, I do recall in the bookstore when Rand first meets Loyal, and he starts going off on a tangent. Rand's like, "Gotta go, bye," and he runs off and cuts him off as well. So maybe that's just the thing that the Ogier are used to humans being in a rush and cutting them off. And with
They're
that, but,
so hasty.
but it just seemed really kind of like, wow, that was like a pivot from being so respectful and deferring, and maybe it's the tension of the moment and what's about to happen and all this stuff, but it was just like a clear like, I'm talking over you, shut up.
Yeah, I haven't. I haven't thought too much about it specifically. In the moment, I agree. I was like, oh, that was a little rude, Moraine. This is Loyal. Come on, what are you doing? But I just kind of give it up to the fact that they're all human and humans are hasty. So,
Yeah.
I haven't given it much more thought.
Well, beyond the fact that it seems extremely difficult to piss off or agitate an Ogier. If you're chasing them through the streets with flames and knives, then he's like, I almost got a bit irritated.
Yeah, but Loyal is so hot-headed.
Yeah, I do have to say though, like, I love the character, I love the characterization, but they really showed his ears in this episode for some reason, and that like kind of broke my heart. I was like, I so want to see those tufted ears and see them like droop down when he's sad, and like he expressed. So I understand why they left it out, but Loyal was like 30% ears in his character.
I still love him.
So I just I love Loyal, I love the character, but I do have this little twinge every time I see him. I'm like, oh, the ear tufts.
Yeah,
My little links. But yeah, so then they're standing in front of these gates. They explain that it's a very dangerous thing. I loved and I hated the scene with the horses, because there's this bond. You see Lan and Mandar where they've got this beautiful head to nose connection, and he's kind of saying the silent goodbye, I'm assuming for now, kind of thing. Moraine says goodbye to her horses, and then they send them all off. So that whole scene I thought was beautiful and how they did that. But then I was kind of like, it's kind of a dick move. Like, right. You say goodbye to your horses, you're like, all right, everyone gone. Like, what, okay, bye, Bella. Like,
don't you leave them in a stable or like under someone else's care or something?
Or like tell everyone else, be like, we're about to go through this gateway, say goodbye to your horse. Like,
yeah.
Egwene, say goodbye to Bella, because you're not going to see her for a while, if ever again. Instead of like petting your horses and be like, all right, all of you get gone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I half expected it to happen, but was still shocked that it happened. Like I could see in what was happening that they were not bringing their horses with them.
Yeah.
But I was still just like, really? That's what you're gonna do?
Well, yeah.
Say goodbye to your horse and then tell everyone else's horse to get out of here.
Exactly. But my meds were in the saddle. But that's what I think that, in my mind, Mandarb and Moraine's horse are both wonderfully trained war horses, and I think they're probably going to lead the others to a point of safety.
I hope so.
Like, they're going to go back to the Tarvalon Towers, which will bring, or stables, which will bring in other questions and stuff like that to come forth. But then they open up, so we find out how dangerous and deadly the ways are. And the gateway's opened, and everyone seems to be on board with this as Moraine does her thing. And then everyone's cheering and going nuts because the wheel weaves as the wheel wills was actually finally said, and that's something that comes up all the time in the book series. So people lost their minds over that.
Yep.
And then we have like that. It was funny because there's this thing with Matt where he's like, "Oh, is it too late to change my mind?"
Mm-hmm.
And then he does what he does, and that's like that's like Matt's smartass humor coming through, and it's like, actually no, that was actually him asking himself a very real question.
Yeah. It's interesting because you say Matt does what he does, but in reality, Matt does nothing. And I think that's the strangest part about it. He doesn't act at all. He just stands there like a crazy person.
Yeah. Yeah.
While everyone else is calling him on, he doesn't go in, he doesn't run away, he just stands there.
He doesn't even like make eye contact with them or anything, or like look, because you would think he would be looking from person to person to person. He's just staring.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there is still a little bit of madness. And I mean, if he's now broken off from everyone else, they're obviously putting him on a different trajectory for the storyline.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe that's the problem. Maybe if they bring all of them to the Dark One's prison and he's not there, maybe he's the missing piece they need to actually defeat the Dark One.
Right. There's lots of reasons that could explain this. Personally, I thought that this was just a cliffhanger trick where, you know, they went black on this scene, and next week when they open the scene, Matt will be jumping through that portal. I could be wrong. That could be a completely different thing, but just the way that it was framed to me looked like it was just let's have a little cliffhanger. We can't just have him go through the portal. That would be boring. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's see what happens with that. I mean, and that could be, but I think it also could be because they actually say where, like Maureen says, this is the fastest route to the eye of the world.
Yep.
And they could be, like you said, with Matt and his sisters, that may be a little further from his family than he wants to be. We don't know where in the world the eye of the world is, but he obviously does. So that time of standing there staring could have been a moment of reflection and putting things together. Natasha, thank you very much for the raid. Greatly appreciate it. A writing raid. Welcome, everyone. Writing raids. This is the Writer's Chat. I'm the column scribe, being joined with Billy, aka Sporkle McSpork. And just to give everyone a heads up, this is the Wheel of Time After the Weave talk show that we do, where we break down the episodes of the Wheel of Time from the week before. So if you're a Wheel of Time fan watching the show and you have not seen episode 6 yet, you will get hit with some pretty major spoilers. We're almost at the end of talking about the show, and then we're going to be doing other writing stuff afterwards. But there's still another 5 minutes of spoilers, just to give you a heads up. But thank you for the raid, Natasha. I hope you had a fantastic stream, and the Pride Rise. Thank you very much. I love it. I very much love it. So welcome, everyone. And after we're done talking about the Wheel of Time, I'm going to be discussing some new inks that I have for writing. So welcome, readers. The Wheel of Time, it's an Amazon Prime show, but it's a book series that's been around since 1991. And Billy and I have waited 31 years to see this finally come to fruition. So we talk about it.
And it's a lot of fun.
It is. So if you've ever watched The Walking Dead, this is kind of like the Talking Dead after show. So this is after the weave. We break down and discuss the Wheel of Time. But yeah, so with the other thing with Matt, though, like you were saying, I kind of see that as possibly my first thought when I saw him sitting there was, well, damn, you're sitting in the middle of a field in a forest outside Tarvalon by yourself. What the hell are you going to do now?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. My biggest concern for Matt currently is that he's just been disconnected from this dagger, and he is with these people that he doesn't necessarily trust. He wants to go home. He wants to protect his sisters. What if him not going with the group is him going back for the dagger? Because the whole reason why he got this dagger in the first place, he's a collector. He's a guy that is constantly trying to get stuff so that he can provide for his family, because his parents don't necessarily do a good job. And I'm very concerned that he's going to fall right back into this.
Yeah, he very well may. Or get caught up get trapped by the Aes Sedai. I don't think the White Cloak's going to be an issue for him, but I don't think they're going to be an issue for anyone for a while. But yeah, I think that's the thing, is where is he going to go? And the other thing is, like, he's been disconnected from the dagger, but he's also been disconnected from reality for the past 2 months. He's been in this stupor of evil that's been taking over him and feeding off of his own evil. And that's something that how strong is that draw to go back to it? Not just for his family, but there's this draw of power. How much strong is that draw going to be there to go back for the dagger?
Yeah.
But also, yeah, he's just not in a good headspace right now. He doesn't know what's up and down, and he's the one that doesn't really have a character arc yet. We see Matt as this scavenger that's trying to do whatever he can to provide for his family. So he scavenges his blade. He gets really sick, changes from himself for a while as this evil is taking over him, and he just gets disconnected from the blade, comes back to his own reality, and he's left by himself. So he, of any of the characters, he really doesn't have an arc yet.
Yeah, and it's this disconnect from everything that makes me worry the most about him, because if everyone else is in the ways and Matt's just left alone in Tar-Valon, what is Matt going to do?
Yeah.
What is Matt going to do?
Or is he going to run until his feet are bloody stumps back to Two Rivers?
Right.
Because I don't think Matt fully believes that he's a chosen one, that he's being chased by the Trollocs. I think he thinks to himself, the Trollocs are going to chase the group. Me by myself, I'm fine. They're not going to come after little old me.
Sure.
So we'll see what that. It's interesting. But I mean, they've set up a couple of new things. Subtle. There were subtle setups through the show, like the boats missing in the Western lands. How are boats disappearing?
That sounds like some Bermuda Triangle type stuff, huh?
Yeah, like seriously, how do you disappear a boat? And then there's, like and then the IL are crossing the spine of the world for the first time, not just the one that was riddled with the arrows in the small mining town, but now we know that there's actually IL are on the move, and we don't really know who the IL are yet.
Yeah, and I believe, but can't remember, but I think Royale specifically said that you don't see Isle on this side of the world.
Yeah.
So the fact that even one crossed over is pretty surprising. But now you're hearing that it's more than one.
Yeah. And Loyal seems pretty damn convinced that Rand is an Isleman.
Yeah, which makes that weird too.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Like, that's... I don't know what's going on with this. Like, Rand is from the Two Rivers, and like he said, he's not an Elman. He's from the Two Rivers, and that's right. That. Like, he has been raised by Tam Althor his entire life, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and what's happening. But they've laid out some interesting tidbits of some more stuff that's happening. They've introduced Tyr, they've introduced disappearing boats, they've introduced the spine of the world.
Absolutely, and we've got 2 episodes left for this season, and just based on these past couple episodes and what has happened, I assume that these are going to be pretty action-packed.
Yeah, and I would agree with that just from the build up to this point. But the other thing too is that the critics that were given advanced screenings were shown up to episode 6. Nobody has seen episode 7 and 8. The critics haven't seen them. 7 and 8 have been left off the table for everybody. Unless they've changed that more recently, but as of 2 or 3 days ago, the last 2 episodes were not shared. So I think those are going to be a install seatbelts in your couch.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be a ride, I think. So I'm excited. I have to say, I really there is some editing issues. There is some not continuity issues, but in the sense of, I find the way, even I was talking to LJ today, and she was saying that there's, for her watching it as a first-time viewer, that there's some, she finds from a writing perspective that there is also some editing issues where they jump from emotion to emotion too quick. Where there'll be a really heavily emotion-packed scene, and then the scene that follows doesn't quite mirror, and the score doesn't quite mirror as well, because LJ's partner is a classical music composer. So she also has good insights in on the score of how things are happening. So I think that's something that, it's not a perfect show. But for what it is, and for the fact that they're trying to take, something the size of the Taj Mahal and cram it down into a suitcase, They're doing a pretty damn good job so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say too that there's a lot of complaints from people when they first showed Tarvalon that it was too small, that other things that may potentially happen in the story, why would it happen that way? Because Tarvalon is so small, it's not big enough to allow for these things to happen. And I really think that that was just forced perspective. Now watching other episodes with it, you realize, like we discussed, it is a lot bigger. And there's a scene where they viewed it from far back, and you could see that it's a sprawling, expansive thing. It was just the way it was framed in the shot, and the angle of the shot.
Yeah, I agree. It's at some point you got to realize that you got to suspend disbelief and just let the show be a show.
And that's it. And I think that's one of the things that I've always enjoyed it, but I'm enjoying it more and more, where I'm not trying to dig through my memory of, is that how this happened in the book? It's just, the books are the books. I'm going to go back, honestly, I'm going to go back and read them again after.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I want to see how this plays out. So we'll see. Although I was in a meeting today where I threatened to flip a table. And that was because I said that at first I was afraid that they were going to do a full season, like do the season, wait for a while, and then do another season, like in next fall or something like that. From what I've heard, it looks like they are going to do the Walking Dead season split, where they do, because I think now the first season was 8 episodes. I think it's 10 or 12 for the next ones coming up. And I think that they are looking at doing half the season, a pause, and then half the season. So we may see some more episodes in the spring, pause over the summer, more episodes in the fall, to tie it that way. And that's where I threatened, because I said, that reading the books, I had to wait 2 years between each book to go through. If they make me wait a year or a year and a half between seasons, I am flipping a desk. Like, that's just, I've waited for 31 years for this. They need to do it properly and on their own schedule, obviously. But I'm really hoping they don't make us wait until next fall to watch this again.
Even if we have to wait a year, it's still better than waiting 2 or 3. So
it is.
I guess I'll take it.
Yeah, but I can see them, because they jumped on season 2 right away, and they're already writing season 3. I think that they're probably going to keep the momentum.
Yeah, and I assume that part of it is, they want their cast to stay in the right age range for most of this. They don't want them all of a sudden growing or doing something else. Yeah. So let's get this filmed.
Yeah, so it's great. And I think too, I think we've addressed the lack of sisters in the tower, beyond the fact that we know that there's problems within the tower. I think that also comes down to COVID regulations and things of trying to we have to remember the first season was filmed in the height of COVID.
Wow.
So I think that's probably it's kind of hard to have a ton of extras when you're filming in that scenario. So
yeah, I'm sure it was difficult in general, because you also would have had to take in consideration crew. So that means that they probably had a fairly low amount of on-set crew as well, which really makes what they put together even more incredible.
Yeah. And what they've done is just stunning to this point. Visually stunning, the acting. And I love this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I love when they bring in relatively unknown actors and actresses and do something like this, and they just, to me, they're already superstars. I'm huge fans of all the actors that they've gone through this. Like I said, I love Perrin and I love Alana. Alana is such a fun character that they've introduced. She's one of those ones where it's like, if you remember when you're a kid and you see those pictures where you're watching, or cartoons, but you'd be watching the main thing on the front, and then if you looked in the back, there was more jokes and gags that were actually funnier than the main thing that was happening. And to me, that's what Alana is that you're watching this thing, but there's more interest happening with her and what she's doing.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. So they've done a fantastic job with it. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. It's sad that it's already the penultimate episode of the season 1. I can't believe we've got to
I know. What is going on?
Yeah. But we have proper internet and all this stuff. And that was the other thing, is my internet was disconnected on Thursday morning, and I didn't get it back until Saturday afternoon.
Whew.
So I couldn't watch on Friday. And my phone was still connected, obviously. So I had the worst time trying to avoid spoilers Because I couldn't watch it till last night, actually, for the first time. So 3 days where I had to avoid spoilers.
I was actually in the same boat, although not because my internet was disconnected. I was just busy. So I had to avoid spoilers until last night, and it was surprisingly difficult.
Yeah, a lot of people were talking about this, and there's a lot of memes
Yeah.
come out of this episode and a lot of stuff.
And that is wonderful.
Yeah, I
That
think
is
this is
wonderful for the
definitely
series.
hitting the mainstream audience. I think it's picking up steam and it's picking up people.
If I remember the article that I read today correctly, it is already the number 5 most watched series on Prime.
Yes, and I also saw that it is rated right now. I think it was, again, if I remember correctly, something like the 3rd rated fantasy series
Yeah.
ever so far. I think
Doing well.
that's been like transcribed into a television or movie or something like that, but it's
Yeah.
one of the highest rated fantasy series as well. So
It's looking good. It's looking good for 8 seasons in a movie.
yeah, a movie would be great with that. And the other thing too is that there's so many, there's prequel books and stuff too, right? And there's other things
Yep.
that branch off, and that might actually be a book I might try to pick up this week, just because it is good for. No, actually, I'll pick it up for myself. But I was going to say there is a lack of a better term, a dictionary of the world where they've got all the different names, they've got the pronunciations, they've got like what is the Emerald Seat, what is the Aes Sedai, what is all this other stuff. However, that book is going to be one giant spoiler because you're going to be seeing names of things and creatures and stuff that aren't here yet. So
Yeah, I believe it is referred to as an encyclopedia.
there we
Wheel
go.
of Time encyclopedia. Yeah.
There we go.
I had that many, many years ago.
Yeah, I had it as well. I have to find all my books. They're all buried in boxes. It's the problem with being a writer and a reader and being married to an English major is
Oh.
our house is like, people hate moving us. We've even had movers complain, being like, you have a lot of books. But yeah, no, we do. Like, no, you have a lot of books. Okay.
Yeah, we know.
Anyways, so let's wrap that now. We've done a great chat on that. Thank you again very much, Billy, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back on Be Right Back chat for just a moment, and then I'm going to come back and we are going to dive into some of these beautiful inks and what they look like and how they work. So I will be right back, chat. Now's a good time to hit a bathroom break and grab another drink. Thanks again, Billy.